Rainbow Six Siege has seen many operators come and go from the spotlight throughout the years. Whether it be more extreme examples like Lion and Ella or less extreme operators like Echo and Maestro, they have all left their own impact on the game's balance and history as a whole. However, the operator we are talking about today has single-handedly carried the defensive side for the past 8 years, and without him, the defense would be nowhere. Now, who am I talking about? Well, to answer that question, we must first go all the way back to the release of Siege on December 1st, 2015. Rainbow Six Siege on release was a refreshing new tactical FPS that was entirely unique compared to other games out at the time. One of the biggest things that helped to separate the game from other titles of the time was its large roster of unique operators with their own gadgets and weapons to choose from. And with the game having a whopping 20 operators, there was a lot for players to learn and a lot of content to mess around with. One of those operators just so happened to be Jaeger, the topic of today's video. What made Jaeger such a strong operator was a couple of different factors. The first was his amazing gun, the 416C, which at the time had a much higher damage, an ACOG available, and a much faster ADS speed. This, along with the fact that he was a 3-speed, made him an absolute demon for the roam game. But that isn't even close to the reason we are talking about him today. The real reason we are talking about him is due to his gadget being absolutely busted on the game's release. If you didn't know, Jaeger's gadget when the game first came out did not work the way it does today. Instead of each of his ADSs having infinite charges, they had a finite number of charges, 2 to be exact. And while I'm sure you're wondering, well, does that mean he was worse? Well, not necessarily, because at the time, his ADSs didn't have a cooldown, meaning that if you just put one ADS down under a window, the attackers would have to waste 2 pieces of burn before being able to get through the ADS. Now, I'm sure you can see how this is a problem. This meant that if Jaeger stacked all his ADSs in one area, 6 pieces of burn would have to be used to get a nade or breaching round through his ADSs. However, no one really realized the problems with this at the time because all Jaeger was being used for was to counter nades. Deployable shields were not strong when the game was released, and there weren't nearly as many gadgets for Jaeger to protect as there is now. So the major problem in balancing that was Jaeger's gadget wouldn't begin to show itself until later on in the game's life cycle. However, what would become an issue earlier on is Jaeger's gun, which was widely considered to be one of the best weapons in the game. The community did get to have some fun with it though, because Ubisoft wouldn't end up nerfing it until Year 2, Season 3, also known as Operation Blood Orchid. Operation Blood Orchid is a season I look back to fondly, considering it was my second season ever playing Siege. We saw 3 new operators in the form of Lee Jun Ying and Ella added into the game, along with a new map theme park to tie it all together. This was a huge amount of content for a season to drop with, and if you've been watching my videos for a while, then you know that 2 of the 3 operators that dropped in this patch will become 2 of the most overpowered operators in the game's history. However, despite all this new amazing content, one of the balancing changes in this patch would drive a large portion of the community into a riot. And that was the decision to remove the ACOG off of Bandit's MP7 and Jaeger's 416. If you played back then, you'll likely know how explosive this change was. It sparked a huge debate in the community about magnification sights on the defensive side and their effects on spawn peeking in the game as a whole. This was such a huge thing back then that every YouTuber and their mom was making videos on it and raking in millions of views. Mr. Homeless literally blew up because of this trend. However, the loss of the ACOG in the grand scheme of things didn't really affect Jaeger. His gun was still strong statistically, and his gadget was the only thing of its kind. And Jaeger would stay this way until the release of Year 4 Season 2, also known as Operation Ember Rise. Operation Ember Rise was looked at as a pretty mediocre operation at the time. We saw the introduction of Amaru, a casual focused operator, Goyo, an operator that was mainly used in Pro League, and the Canal rework, which was considered to be an extremely lackluster map for ranked. However, the biggest change in this patch that would affect Jaeger's playstyle and realistically the entire defensive side forever was a deployable shield rework. If you didn't know, deployable shields used to look like this on the game's release. They were completely solid with no windows or anything on them. This made them a lot more niche and difficult to use, since when hiding behind them, you had no idea where the attackers were. But this update would change all of that because it would add the bulletproof glass that you see on shields today. This slight rework in the design of the deployable shield instantly made it the best secondary gadget in the game. If an operator had access to a deployable shield, they were instantly considered to be a good operator by players at nearly all levels. And as time went on, people realized that bringing Goyo alongside Jaeger allowed you to have 2 deployable shields that took a lot of utility to get rid of, and that when the attackers finally got rid of them, fire would be released in that area, stopping the attackers from entering. As soon as this strategy was discovered, one of the worst metas in Siege's history began, the utility meta. And it was all because of Jaeger's ADSs that this meta was able to flourish into one of the most defender-sided metas in the history of Siege. However, this wasn't even close to the end of it, because the next operation that Ubisoft was releasing would make the situation 10 times worse. Operation Shifting Tides was a really good operation, all things considered. It brought us 2 new operators in the form of Wamai and Kali, and it brought us a new map rework into the game for Theme Park, which the map definitely needed one. However, what we're here for in today's video is the release of Wamai. As I just explained earlier, before Shifting Tides, the game was starting to shift into a more utility-oriented gameplay loop, and Wamai made that shift even more drastic. This is because at the time, his magnets, when combined with Jaeger's ADSs, allowed you to burn 10 projectiles from the attacker's total. Obviously, this was a huge balancing issue, and defenders immediately began abusing the 2 of them alongside Goyo to make attacking a living hell. This stark contrast in the way the game was being played launched the Ubisoft balancing team into a panic. They knew that they needed to do something to shift the game into a more fun direction, and they decided that nerfing Jaeger, one of the operators allowing this meta to flourish, was the best course of action. So naturally, Jaeger would receive multiple significant nerfs in the near future. The first being in the mid-season patch of Shifting Tides. In this patch, we saw Jaeger's gun get a pretty significant damage nerf of 5, meaning that his gun went from dealing 43 damage to dealing 38. This nerf may not seem like much, but it instantly made Jaeger's gun statistically one of the worst guns in the game, especially compared to attacker weaponry at the time. However, Ubisoft wasn't done nerfing Jaeger's offensive capabilities because they would come back for another nerf in the following patch, Operation Void Edge, where in that patch, they would make Jaeger a 2-speed. This change, combined with the nerf to Jaeger's gun mentioned previously, made him a much weaker roaming option. But due to his gadget still being incredibly strong and allowing the defensive side to go through the utility meta with ease, he would still remain as one of the most picked defenders until his gadget was nerfed. And that wouldn't come until Year 5 Season 4, also known as Operation Neon Dawn. Operation Neon Dawn was a really solid operation in the grand scheme of things. It saw the release of Aruni, which was another nade denial operator that brought a lot of utility to the table, and it brought the rework for Skyscraper to the game. This map rework may have been pretty controversial, but I think it turned out pretty good. But the real reason we are here in today's video is the rework to Jaeger's gadget. This update saw Jaeger's ADSs get reworked into the way we all know them today. His ADSs went from having 2 charges to having an infinite number of charges. But as a trade-off, his ADSs now had to reload for 10 seconds before being able to destroy another projectile. This meant that now, instead of 3 stacked ADSs requiring 6 pieces of burn to get through, they would only take 3. This was a massive nerf to Jaeger's gadget. I remember at the time it was a pretty big debate in the community whether this was a nerf or a buff, but looking back at it now, it was definitely a pretty huge nerf, and by a long shot. This simple change made Jaeger a much weaker operator overnight. Now, one would think that Jaeger's pick rate would have fallen off drastically considering his gun was a shadow of its former self and his gadget was just nerfed to the ground, but this did not occur at all. Jaeger continued to dominate on the charts. So Ubisoft went back in and decided to hit Jaeger again with another nerf to his gun. But that nerf wouldn't come until the following season, Operation Crimson Heist. Crimson Heist is a relatively recent operation, so I won't be spending too much time explaining what happened, but this operation was overall a mixed bag. We saw the introduction of Flores as our new operator, and the map rework for Border as our newest map to the ranked pool. The new content was kind of average, but as you guys know, we aren't here for that. We're here for the changes to Jaeger himself. In the update, we saw a huge nerf to Jaeger's gun. Firstly, Ubisoft decided to remove 5 bullets from the 416C's magazine. This was already bad enough since his gun already had 26 bullets per mag, but to go along with it, they brought a nerf to the 416's vertical recoil to make the gun harder to control. These 2 changes combined made Jaeger's situation much more dire, because now not only was his gadget much worse, but now his gun was quite literally one of the worst defensive weapons in the game. Now, for most operators, this would be where they would die. Well, most operators aren't Jaeger. Despite all of this, even today, Jaeger is still in the top 5 of defender pick rates. Now, why is that? Well, there are a few factors leading to this. The first is that Ubisoft made his gun's recoil easier to control, and they buffed the extended barrel, allowing the 416 to deal pretty decent damage, but that isn't the main reason. The biggest reason he is picked today is due to his gadget being damn near necessary to win a round. And if you aren't picking him, you have to pick Wamai, because no nade denial means the attackers can clear utility for free and they can potentially nade your anchors on site. So even though Jaeger's gadget was nerfed to the ground and it literally does half of what it used to, it is still one of the strongest gadgets in the game. Now, how long will Jaeger's reign last? Well, it's already lasted a whopping 8 years, and I really don't see it letting up anytime soon, if ever. The reason for this is because the game's entire balance revolves around Jaeger's gadget. If Rainbow Six Siege didn't have ADSs, the game would be much more attacker-sided, and attackers would be able to deal with Defender utility a lot easier. The only way I ever see Jaeger falling off his throne is if another operator or gadget comes to take his place, or if Ubisoft just decides to go absolutely ham and nerf his gadget to the ground. This could very well happen in the future, but as it is right now, the defenders absolutely need at least one nade denial operator per round. And ever since the game's release, that operator has been Jaeger. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's story of the best defender to ever touch Rainbow Six Siege. If you did, I make Siege content just like this twice a week, so go subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter if you don't want to miss the next upload. If you want to see more of me, go follow me on Twitch because I'll be going live roughly 2 hours after this video goes up, and hopefully I'll see you there. Also, if you want to see yourself in future videos or streams, join up in the Discord. I want to get active over there, so don't be afraid to stop by. I'm sure we'll have some fun. Now, if you want to watch another video just like this one, a video will be popping up on your screen right now where I talk about the gun that broke Rainbow Six Siege. I'll see you next time, friends, and peace.